Can someone who has never seen a Superman movie, feature, or anything related to Superman in his life go from completely uninterested fan to someone who understands within the span of 2 hours? Well, we're about to find out. Man of Steel. Now, for maybe the 5 people in this world who don't know what this story is about, I'll go ahead and just sum it up real quick. The story follows the origin story of Superman, and it follows him at birth once he is born on the planet of Krypton thanks to his father Jor-El being the first natural Kryptonian birth in centuries. He's sent to Earth, he's raised among Earthlings, and by the time he comes of age, he realizes who he is, where he comes from, and he's now dealing with the conflicts of whether he deals with his Kryptonian heritage or his earthly home, and trying to find the conflict and the mesh between both worlds, and try to figure out the perfect balance between all of those. All the while, he has a new menace in the form of General Zod, who comes to Earth, who wants to take over the planet and rebuild a new Kryptonian future. Now, as I stated in the intro of this video, I have never ever seen anything related to Superman in my life. I know about Superman, I know about some of the villains like Lex Luthor, Brainiac, Darkseid, those guys. I know about them, but I've never seen an incarnation of them. I've had people describe them to me, and I've had people tell me a little bit about their backstory and where they come from or why they don't like Superman and Superman himself, but I've just never seen anything related to him. I've just never seen any of the films, the shows, nothing. And during my course of my trailer reaction for the last Man of Steel trailer, I was telling people the same thing, that I was completely cold to the franchise. I had no interest in Superman whatsoever. I just never grew up with him as a kid. I was more of a cool monsters, creatures kind of kid, never a superhero fan, never big into Superman, Batman, never Spider-Man, nothing. No superhero really in my childhood really stuck with me, so it just didn't catch on. And so with Man of Steel, I was really interested in the fact that A, it was directed by Zack Snyder, who is a very beautiful visual director. Like, every one of his movies looks absolutely beautiful. And it was produced by Christopher Nolan, who got me into the Batman franchise when I saw Batman Begins for the first time, and also, like that movie, it was my first introduction to the character of Batman. As before, I had never seen anything Batman related ever. So I was kind of curious to see if Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder could team up and do something similar with Superman. And for me, I always did not like whenever someone described Superman to me, I could always never get interested in the character, because I was thinking to myself, how in the world could I relate to someone who has so much godlike power that, to me, I just I don't need to worry about this guy. There's no dramatic tension at all when it comes to this character. And I said the same thing in my trailer reaction. I just said to myself, I just could never get past that. I just could never, and that was literally the biggest hurdle for this movie to overcome. For me to understand, I was like, okay, give me a reason to understand this character, to understand how conflicted he is about his origins, where he comes from, and why he is the way he is. Give me a reason to care about Superman. And during the course of this movie, that was its biggest challenge, was for me to care and understand Superman. And I know that Superman is a character beloved by hundreds, thousands, millions of people. And I was like, I want to understand. I want to understand why Superman is loved so much. And so I went to this movie completely cold, with the suggestion of every Superman fan that answered on my trailer reaction that says, look, you need to go into this completely cold. We want to see how someone like you, who has never been exposed to a Superman movie or a Superman anything, responds to this. And so I was curious for myself and trying to see, like, okay, now I'm sitting in the movie, and what did I think of it? Now, I'll say this, folks. I don't know if this is going to rank up in my top movies of all time, but I now understand. I finally understand why. I understand why people love Superman, and it was presented in a way that can understand and make me sympathize with Superman. I mean, that blew my mind. I was completely blown away by the fact that you could present this God among people in a way that someone like me, who is, I wouldn't want to say, kind of hindered most from a normal human, can now relate to a superhero who's practically invincible. I never thought that could happen in a million years. And I was completely stunned by that fact. By the idea that I was just like, I understand it. And it was, sorry. Before I go completely nuts over this movie, let me go ahead and explain why. The way that Henry Cavill presents himself as Superman is presenting a conflict that I personally go through every single day of my life. The idea that you have to be this fusion of two worlds, his Kryptonian heritage and his earthly existence, and trying to figure out a perfect balance between those. He also presents a conflict of saying, like, look, I don't want to be hurtful to you guys. I don't want to be a nuisance. I don't want to hurt anybody. I'm here to help you. But people don't trust him. He's afraid that if he shows himself, that he is going to be hated, he's going to be feared because of what he can do, and people will not try to understand it because he's so extraordinary. Hans Zimmer's score. I have not heard such an exhilarating theme for a superhero movie since the Dark Knight theme. I mean, the Dark Knight theme is one of those things that feels very primal, very cathartic. I mean, heck, I play that in my car every time I'm on the highway, and it just makes me feel like I'm in the Batmobile. Trust me, I've done that plenty of times, and I'm sure you guys have done the same thing. But with the Superman theme, whenever he's flying, whenever he's soaring and using his powers, it's just, you feel inspired, you feel just pumped out of your mind to just want to be Superman. You want to fly at like 1,000,000 miles an hour. You want to just soar through the sky, and then you want to use heat vision or just try and just be invincible and pushing yourself further than you could ever do. And that just made him all the more inspiring. The score became a character in itself. But at the same time, when all the action is going on, all the special effects, which by the way look amazing, are going on, I understand that the movie needs to slow down and humanize Superman and humanize Clark Kent. And it's showing that during the course of this movie in flashbacks, little bits and pieces of his past. We don't get a straightforward linear narrative where it's like, he's on Krypton, he's sent to Earth, he grows up, becomes Clark Kent, then becomes Superman and lives wild through existence. No, by the time you already get to Earth, he pretty much is already full-grown Clark Kent. But at the same time, he's still trying to figure out his own place in the world. He's trying to figure out what to do with himself and trying to keep his existence subtle for the time being and try to protect people while he can under the guise of Clark Kent. And so by the time he does become Superman, he realizes that he becomes something more than that. And by the time that the movie concludes, it seems like he's already becoming more and more accustomed to the idea of like, I may be an outsider, but people need to learn to trust me as an outsider. It's a system of trust where he has to learn to trust Earthlings to accept him, and he has to accept Earthlings and take a leap of faith into say like, look, I am trusting you guys not to turn against me, and I will not turn against you. I just love the way this conflict presents himself, and it's just like, again, I know I'm focusing around this one conflict, but I feel like that is the best praise I can give this movie. The fact that it took someone like me who is not a fan of Superman at the start of this and completely understand why is a feat. It is a marvelous feat. It is just interesting to me that I just couldn't understand this before. And so, again, I'm probably getting off sidetracked. Going back to some of the more aesthetics, the visual effects, like I said before, are outstanding. Zack Snyder does a terrific job of presenting a world that feels like Earth, but you realize that there is a more to this universe. I mean, of course, that's the DC universe, but all the technology, all the aspects of Kryptonian society that come into play. And on some level, you understand why certain villains or characters are the way they are. Because according to this Kryptonian origin story, at least, I don't know if this is consistent with the rest of Kryptonian lore, I don't know, I'm just going off the movie, but there's this one thing called a Genesis Chamber where every character or every Kryptonian is genetically structured from birth to fulfill a certain role, which leads me into General Zod, played by Michael Shannon. I actually really liked Michael Shannon's Zod. At first, during the trailer reaction, I was very hesitant about his delivery of his lines, whether he was going to be a good villain, but the way I see it is like, I understand the villain's motivations. I don't know if I could necessarily call him actually, No, I think I could call him a sympathetic villain, a somewhat sympathetic villain. Not one of the best I've ever seen, but one that was very good for the role. And saying like, look, you understand his motivations. He just wants to rebuild his planet. He wants to ensure the survival of his race and make sure to protect it. But what he is doing in order to achieve that is, it is wrong. It's like, this is wrong, but he's just doing what he has been built to do, which it also presents to me the kind of interesting choice between Superman and Zod, and the idea that it seems like the way the movie presents itself is that Superman is meant to be the embodiment of choice. The idea that Superman chooses to be this good guy. He chooses to go up against Zod. He chooses to be this great person, to push himself to limits and to the aspirations that no one really thought he could do besides his father, played by Kevin Costner. I just loved seeing that, and Zod was meant to be the embodiment of fate and duty and saying, no, you have an obligation to do this, and just seeing those two forces collide with each other made to me a much more interesting conflict. I understand if this is not the best review. I'm just trying to exhibit all the emotional aspects, and I understand throughout the course of this movie, or as I'm reading into it as I'm making this video. I understand that. I apologize for that. Another thing I have to mention for the course of this movie is Lois Lane herself. Now, Lois Lane, I have heard multiple times over that she's kind of like the embodiment of a damsel in distress. Now, and I don't know if that's different for either incarnations, considering I haven't seen any of them, but the Lois Lane in this movie, played by Amy Adams, I really liked watching her because it seemed to me like she was more of the anchor for Superman, the way she was presenting herself, and that she was sort of be the one person who could try to be that connection between Superman and the human world, and saying like, look, I want to understand you. I want to know your story. You can trust us, and sort of kind of like an ambassador in some ways. And I liked how she was very critical to Superman's own anchoring into the human world and accepting Earth as his true home, like he has always done. And so I could go on about this movie for a while, but I think I should just wrap it up here before I go way too much into this. I've already read into this movie so much. I mean, it's just, there's so many cathartic things about this movie, and I mean, I was cheering in the audience. I was really sucked into it. I could not take my eyes off the screen from what I was seeing. It was just something that I felt was interesting, and just seeing Superman fly for the first time, it was just like, you really felt the power inside of Superman, and you just felt like he is pushing himself further and further throughout the course of this movie, and that is something that I personally can relate to and respect. I mean, I've had people come to me and say that I have inspired them to do something because I pushed myself to do something that nobody thought I could do. I mean, I've swum a mile, I've climbed rock walls. I mean, sure, I can't fly, that would be awesome, but it's just something that's the biggest thing I'm focusing on here, folks. The fact that Zack Snyder, Christopher Nolan, David S. Goyer, Cavill, Amy Adams, Michael Shannon, Kevin Costner, everyone in this movie presented a Superman movie that I can relate to. It finally made me understand why people love Superman. And for that alone, I have to give Superman, the movie Man of Steel, is absolutely worth every penny. So tell me, folks, what did you think of Man of Steel? Did you enjoy it? Have you seen any other incarnation of Superman? And what did you think about it? Or do you prefer the Christopher Reeve films, the animated series, anything else related to Superman? And to kick this off, I am actually planning a Superman marathon. I'm getting a lot of stuff in the mail. I'm actually going through Smallville right now. I won't give my opinions on that one just yet, but hopefully I'm going to try and plow through Smallville, all of it, in about a week. That's going to be hard, but it's not the first time I've ever marathoned a show. I mean, heck, I did Avatar: The Last Airbender in 3 days. I was bored one day. What else was I supposed to do? And so, I'll just leave it there. Just tell me what your thoughts on Man of Steel are. I'm very happy the fact that now I can understand Superman. I may never be the biggest fanboy in the world for Superman, but at least now, whenever someone tells me they are a fan of Superman, I can now understand why. And that to me is the most important thing about this movie. I finally understand why people love Superman, and I can understand and like Superman in my own way through this movie. So until next time, everybody, I'm Perry the One-Armed Legend. You name it, I can play it.